What's up, you guys? It's Graham here. So have you ever been curious how much money it would actually cost to be able to afford a home like this, or even this, now that prices and mortgage rates are at their all-time highs? Well, wonder no longer, because today we're going to be covering exactly how much income it takes to rent or purchase the typical home in 2025, based on current prices, interest rates, and lender guidelines. Because when you see the final amount and how much money it takes to actually be able to sustain those payments, you're going to be shocked. And not in a good way. Plus, I say all of this as someone who's worked full-time in real estate since 2008 as a real estate agent, investor, landlord, and homeowner. So I'll give you a first-hand experience as to exactly what you could expect, and then at the end of the video, I'll share how much money you need to have to afford something like this, just in case you win the lottery. Although before we start, as usual, if you appreciate videos like this, or even if you just find them helpful, it would mean the world to me if you hit the like button or subscribe. If you haven't done that already, it takes you a split second, it's totally free, and as a thank you for doing that, here's a picture of a kitten. So thanks so much, and also big thank you to Kikoff for sponsoring this video, but more on that later. Alright, so when it comes to the cost of homeownership, I've noticed that there's this general mindset that renting is throwing away money, and buying a home is always a good investment. And even though there can be some truth to these statements, it's not the entire picture. So to give you a full understanding of exactly what's involved, let's discuss renting. I've said this before, but there's a saying out there that goes something like, your rent is going to be the most you'll pay for housing every single month, and your mortgage will be the least you'll spend every single month. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, that is extremely true. Anytime you rent, the payment is the payment. That's it. It's super simple. There aren't any surprise city assessments, property tax increases, insurance premiums, or roof repairs that could empty your bank account on a moment's notice. Whereas when you buy, that's just the very beginning. For example, first, when you purchase a home, you're gonna have a mortgage. In most cases, this is broken down between a mix of principal and interest, usually amortized over 15 to 30 years, at which point your home is paid off in full. If you have a fixed interest rate, this means your monthly payment's not gonna be changing throughout the entire duration of your loan until your home is paid off. And from this perspective, yeah, it's actually pretty similar to renting. Except, unfortunately, this is literally the only cost that is not going to be going a lot higher. Like second, when owning, you're also going to have property taxes. This one is typically based on a percentage of your property's purchase price, and it usually ranges anywhere from 0.4% to more than 2% of the property's assessed value every single year. Third, you also have insurance costs. See, anytime you own a property, a lender requires that you have a comprehensive insurance policy to cover anything that might happen, like a freak of nature fire because California wants to save a declining population of smeltfish. And just like property taxes, this amount readjusts every single year based on the risk likelihood of your area and number of claims in your location. Or they could just drop you altogether if you're in a high-risk location. Fourth, you then also have repairs. This might include replacing an AC unit, fixing a water heater, replacing a roof, spraying for termites, and all the other fun stuff that comes along with home ownership. In terms of how much this costs, some people use the 1% rule, which says you'll spend 1% of your property's value every single year on repairs, while others use the $1 rule, which says you'll spend $1 for every square foot of livable space every year. But finally, fifth, you have other. Now this one is somewhat hard to calculate, but it usually includes things like HOA costs, landscape, upgrades, routine cleaning, and every other aspect of homeownership that you never really think of until you check your bank account at the end of the year and have a heart attack. Because of that, the cost of owning is usually substantially higher than the cost of renting, and as a result, that'll impact what you're able to afford. So if you're curious how much money you need to make to afford the typical home in 2025 here in the United States, here is your answer. To start with the basics, we'll get the simplest part out of the way. Renting. Since this is a fixed cost, the general rule of thumb is that your rent shouldn't exceed 30% of your gross income before taxes. This means if you make $40,000 a year, your rent shouldn't exceed $1,000 a month. If you make $80,000 a year, your rent should be capped at $2,000 a month. If you make $160,000 a year, it's $4,000 a month. You get the idea. However, this rule of thumb was apparently created during a 1969 amendment to public housing before record student loan debt, $700 car payments, and the Hawk Tuah coin. So because of that, there could be a few more accurate guidelines that are adjusted for today's cost of living, like the 50-30-20 rule, which suggests that you spend no more than 50% of your take-home pay after taxes on needs like housing, food, and transportation, 30% for wants like clothing, travel, and hobbies, and 20% for additional savings and debt repayment. With this, your entire financial picture is taken into consideration with a bit of savings mixed in as well, although this probably means you're going to spend a lot less than 30% of your income income on housing, which could be a bit of a challenge during a time when everything costs a lot of money. This is why I personally take the approach of what's called backwards budgeting, where you add up all of your fixed, non-negotiable costs that you can't live without, like debt repayment, transportation, food, healthcare, and so on, include a buffer of 10 to 15% for savings, include another buffer of 10% for wants, and then you could spend whatever is left over on housing. For some people, this might be 15%, for others it could be 25%, but I like that this gets you in the habit of saving and investing first, and then spending what's left over second. And this is really going to help you if one day you want to buy a house, or a Lamborghini. Or I guess if you just want a really simple answer, ideally you should keep your rent to under 20% of your gross take-home pay before taxes if you want to prioritize saving. That means if you want to rent this house for $2,800 a month, you should be bringing in anywhere from $110,000 to $170,000. Or what about this home for $4,000 a month? Ideally, you should be making anywhere from $140,000 to $240,000 a year. Or this house for $10,000 a month, you should be making anywhere from $360,000 to $600,000 a year. After that, when it comes to buying a home, there's a few guidelines that experts recommend you follow, and the first is what's known as the 28% rule. This states that you should spend no more than 28% of your gross income on your mortgage payment, which includes your property taxes and insurance. To calculate this, just take your monthly income, multiply that by 0.28, and there you go. That's how much you should be spending on housing. Now, because of that, under this formula, if you make $5,000 a month, your housing cost should not exceed $1,400, which is enough to afford a home in a $205,000 price point with 20% down at a 7% interest rate. Of course, if you're disappointed that a $60,000 salary is barely enough to afford a $200,000 home once you've already saved up a $40,000 down payment, you're not alone. And if you want something to blame other than decades of underbuilding, zoning restrictions, inflation, and gentrification, it's interest rates. Like, just consider that when mortgage rates were down at 3%, a $60,000 income was enough to afford a home in the $315,000 price range. But now with costs having increased, the final number is significantly lower today in 2025. That's why under the 28% rule, you would need to earn $145,000 a year to comfortably afford a $500,000 home. You would need to make $215,000 a year for a $750,000 home. And you would need to make $285,000 to purchase a $1 million home at a 7% interest rate, assuming a 20% down payment, not including maintenance, repairs, or property insurance increases. This also means that if you make the median household income in the United States of $80,000 a year, under this rule, you could not afford the median priced home in the United States, which would cost $427,000, or $2,850 a month with $105,000 down. In fact, your monthly payment would be $1,000 higher than the 28% rule would allow you to purchase. However, keep in mind that these are just guidelines, and if you want to bump up your price range, there are lenders out there that'll give you significantly more money than you might expect. So you're going to want to hear this. To start, when it comes to getting a mortgage from a bank or lender, the first thing they're going to do is run your credit. This shows them how you've handled your debts in the past, if you've always paid on time as agreed, and if you could responsibly handle a monthly payment. The way I see it, this is the single most influential aspect when it comes to getting a competitive mortgage at a low interest rate. And the first thing you're going to want to do is this. Before you go and apply with a lender, go and check your credit. And if it's lower than you expected, it's crucial to begin making improvements as soon as possible. And one of the ways you could do that is with our sponsor, Kikoff. For those unaware, Kikoff is a credit building tool that's designed to help you build credit safely and easily with affordable monthly plans designed to help you quickly improve key credit factors. You could sign up in minutes with no hidden fees, no credit check, and no interest. And their affordable monthly plans start at just $5 a month and are designed to improve key credit features like positive history and lower utilization. This payment to Kikoff on autopay automatically gets reported to all 3 credit bureaus. And users with credit under 600 that made on-time payments increased their credit by an average of 28 points in the first month and an average of 58 points in their first year. Look, without exaggeration, like it or not, your credit is one of the most important aspects in determining how much you pay for the entire duration of your loan. And if you don't get this part handled as soon as possible, you could easily wind up paying thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars more than necessary, not just on your home, but on any loan that you take. So if you're interested in signing up and improving your credit, Kikoff is offering my audience 80% off their first month when you go to getkickoff.com/Graham or use the link down below in the description. Not to mention, Kikoff is the #1 credit building app on the App Store, and it's been praised by Credit Karma and NerdWallet as a smart way to build credit. Again, the link is down below in the description, or go to getkickoff.com/Graham to get started today. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the video. All right, now in terms of how much home you could afford, before we talk about how much money a lender will give you, we need to talk about the golden metric known as the 30-33 rule. With this, there are 3 main points to follow, with the first being no more than 30% of your gross income should go towards your mortgage, property taxes, and insurance. Just like the last strategy, this means that if you make $72,000 a year, your monthly payment would be limited to $1,800 a month, which would buy you something in the $260,000 price range. If you make $150,000 a year, you could afford something in the $550,000 range, and at $300,000 a year, you could comfortably afford a $1.1 million house. Now, the second 30% rule is to have at least 30% of the property's value saved up in cash. Why? Well, this strategy recommends that you make at least a 20% down payment and keep 10% on the sidelines as a buffer for anything that might come up. Now, personally, I tend to agree with this one because the 20% down payment usually gets you the most favorable interest rates and terms with a lender. It lowers your monthly payment, it gives you a bit of a buffer in the event the market goes down, and having cash on the sidelines is a good thing just in case something eventually breaks. And finally, the 3 part of the rule suggests that you do not buy a home that costs more than 3 times your annual income. This means if you make $75,000 a year, your price point should be $225,000. If you make $100,000 a year, that's a $300,000 home, and so on. To me, the 30-33 rule is probably one of the safest, most conservative approaches to home ownership because it really ensures that you don't take on too much house too soon before you could really afford it. However, in terms of what a lender will give you and how much house you could realistically buy if you want to max yourself out, here's the answer, because it's pretty surprising. In terms of how much home you could realistically buy, lenders really only care about 2 things: income and debt. That's it. The income part is fairly straightforward. How much money do you make every month? Do you have stable employment? And do you have 1 to 2 years of tax returns? If the answer to that is yes, congratulations, you got half of it done. However, the debt part is a little bit more complicated. See, anytime you qualify for a loan, lenders look at what's called your debt-to-income ratio, which calculates how much money you have left over after expenses. In this case, most lenders want a debt-to-income ratio no higher than 45%, which means no more than 45% of your gross income after expenses could go towards all things housing, including your mortgage. As a quick example of this, if you make $8,000 a month, a lender will want no more than $3,600 a month going towards all of your debts. And in this case, if you were to have a $500 student loan payment, $700 car payment, and a $100 credit card payment, you would have $2,300 left over for all things housing, which would buy you a home in the $335,000 price point, assuming you put 20% down. Now, since lenders use debt as a way of qualifying payments, things like auto loans, student loans, and credit card payments work against you in terms of what a lender is willing to loan. So if you have no other debts and you make that $8,000 a month, all $3,600 could go towards housing, which in that case would buy you something in the $530,000 price range, with of course 20% down. Does this mean it's a good idea to go and spend 5 times your annual income to buy a house? Probably not, but there are plenty of lenders out there that will give it to you. And this also means that if you make $12,000 a month, you could theoretically afford an $800,000 home. If you want to buy a $1.2 million home, you'd need to make about $18,000 a month, and at $2 million, you're looking at $30,000 a month. Of course, these are all just rough estimates, in addition to also having a good credit score and down payment. But if you want my advice on how you could best go about doing this, here's what I think. Personally, I'd first take a look at the overall cost of buying versus renting and just ask yourself, what makes more sense financially? Like right now, you might be surprised to learn that at today's interest rates and prices, renting is cheaper than buying in all 50 states. In fact, it's said that across the United States, it costs households on average 38% more to buy than rent. To make matters worse, the premium for home ownership over renting is the highest it's ever been in history. Look, as a landlord and homeowner myself, unless I find a great deal, get a really low interest rate, or I'm super confident an area is going to be going up in value over the next 5 to 7 years, I think renting is the underappreciated choice. And if patience is on your side, you may as well just wait until you find a great deal or a home you plan to live in for at least 10 to 20 years, and then buy it if you could comfortably afford it. Otherwise, I hate to say it, there's little financial reason to buy a house these days, assuming you could save a lot of money on rent. Like as an example, take this home in Las Vegas. You would be paying $3,500 a month for your mortgage, property taxes, and insurance, not including maintenance, after saving up a $100,000 down payment. Or you could rent an identical home down the street for $2,750 a month. Now, I'm sure some people will say, but Graham, when you buy a house, you're going to be building equity, so that's not fair. Okay, well, in the first year, you'd be paying down your mortgage by $4,100, or about $344 a month, which effectively takes your payment from $3,500 down to $3,150 a month. And now, owning a home is still $400 a month more expensive. Not to mention, if you have $100,000 saved up as a down payment, you could just put that in a treasury making 4.5%, and all of a sudden that $4,500 more than offsets the money you would be gaining by paying down the mortgage. Separate from that, if you want a really quick life hack to determine how much a property will cost you, just look at the 9.35% rule. Essentially, the cost of a property is really going to consist of a 7% mortgage, 1.1% average property tax, 1% for repairs and maintenance, and 0.25% for everything else, giving you a total of 9.35%. This means you could take a $500,000 home, calculate 9.35% of that, and all of a sudden, you could see it'll cost you $46,750 a year, or $3,895 a month, if you wanted to own it. To me, this is the greatest life hack rule of thumb ever, because in a few seconds, you could easily calculate the cost of home ownership and compare it with the cost of renting. For example, take a look at this home in Los Angeles for $650,000. At 9.35%, you could see it'll cost you $60,000 a year, or $5,000 a month, versus this home nearby for $3,500 a month. Anyway, in terms of whether it's better to buy or rent, the honest answer is there's a lot of variables that play into this, like interest rates, inventory, the cost of building, insurance rates, and so on. But overall, here's why renting could be better. First, if you plan to stay in your home for less than 7 years, then renting tends to be the cheaper option. That's because when you move and sell, you're not going to have to come out of pocket for things like escrow fees, commissions, title charges, and miscellaneous expenses that usually reduce your take-home selling price by about 6%. That's why generally, the longer you own your home for, the easier it is to spread these charges over a period of 10 to 20 years. But in the short term, you're unlikely to recoup it anytime soon. Second, renting is better if you could make a significantly higher return from your down payment. For example, if you're running a business and tying up $100,000 in a property results in you making a lot less money, that could be a case against buying. We're also at a bit of a tipping point where a 7% mortgage is about on pace with what you could earn in the stock market, so it might make sense to have your money not tied up in a house. Third, this might sound self-explanatory, but renting could also be better if you believe the market's going to stay flat or even go down in the short term. As of now, housing prices have completely defied the odds by continuing to go higher even despite higher interest rates, but this isn't guaranteed to happen over the next 10 years. Fourth, renting could also be better if you want to have very little upfront cost or responsibility. Like outside of fixing items that you directly damage, a landlord's going to be responsible for all the property tax and insurance increases, repairs, or anything else that goes wrong with the home. You, as the tenant, just pay one fixed cost and everything is taken care of for you. If you have a good landlord, of course. And finally, fifth, renting could be better if you value flexibility. The fact is, with renting, you could pick up and leave as soon as your lease agreement is over. You could upgrade, downgrade, move as often as you want. And with a lot of rentals on the market these days, you have quite a bit of leverage as a tenant if you have good references and a quick move-in. Of course, the downside to renting is, number one, you're going to be at the mercy of the landlord. This means if a landlord wants to suddenly raise your rent for no reason at all, even if it's above market rate just because they can, there's nothing stopping them. Two, your rental cost is not going to be locked in, so you're somewhat at the whims of the market. Even though this could work in your favor, like right now when there's a lot of rentals on the market and a surplus of inventory, rental prices could end up going up higher in the future, even more than that of owning a home. And three, you have no way to customize your home and make it yours when you move in. This means no painting the walls crazy colors, adding in your own deck, doing any remodels, because at the end of the day, it's not your home, it's somebody else's. Although just remember, this isn't the entire picture, and even though renting can be great in the short term, there are some serious advantages to buying. First of all, long term, owning still tends to be the better choice. Even though the market could very well trade sideways or go down in the short term, long term, housing is still proven to be a very resilient investment, and the longer you plan to hold on to it for, the more likely you are to come out ahead profitable. Now second, by owning, you're able to lock in your monthly mortgage until your home is eventually paid off. Now even even though things like property taxes, insurance, and repairs can fluctuate and go up over time, at least your core fixed monthly expense isn't going anywhere, and you could better plan ahead because of that. And third, when you buy a house, there is a psychological benefit that it's yours. If you want and value stability, that could be a huge reason to buy a house, but it does come at a cost at usually significantly higher monthly payments. So after watching this, if you're gonna go and buy a house, at least do me this favor. Please shop around your interest rate to find the lowest price. Then negotiate with the seller to get a good deal. Don't be afraid of doing some cosmetic repairs yourself to make it your perfect home, and only purchase something that you plan to keep at least 10 years. Yes, owning is expensive right now, but through diligent saving, research, and patience, it's absolutely doable, especially if you know upfront exactly how much it's going to cost. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering how much it'll cost you every single month to own a home like this, for $195 million, here's your answer. Now, even though realistically, whoever buys this house is probably just going to pay for it outright in cash, for fun, let's assume they put 20% down. That's $39 million. They're also going to get a $156 million mortgage, which works out to just over $1 million a month. You'd also have property taxes at a rate of 1.25%, which works out to an additional $203,000 a month. Insurance would easily be another $30,000 a month. We could throw in another $20,000 a month for maintenance, repairs, and landscape, and that brings your total cost to $1,253,000 every single month, with $39 million down. Using the 30-33 rule, you would need to be making a minimum of $4.2 million a month or $50 million a year to be able to afford something like this. Although, again, let's be real. Most likely, the person who's buying this is going to be rich enough just to send a wire transfer and be done with it. So in terms of the actual cost, if you have to ask, you can't yet afford it. So with that said, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, big thank you to Kikoff for sponsoring this video. The link is down below in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy it. Thanks so much, and until next time.